time grief we go. Gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I'm your host, Alix Long, along with my co-host and husband, David Long. Our guest today is Abel Keogh, a relationship coach and expert on dating and marrying a widower. A remarried widower himself, Abel has successfully helped thousands of women know if the widowers they are dating are ready for a serious relationship. He also helps widowers understand what it takes to overcome grief and open their hearts to another woman. Abel is the author of 4 dating guides, a memoir about losing his late wife to suicide and falling in love again, and co-author of a book with his wife, Juliana, about the struggles and questions they had to overcome to take their relationship from dating to marriage. His Dating a Widower YouTube channel contains over 200 videos and valuable advice for widowers and the women who are dating or married to them. Welcome, Abel. We are so excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alix and David, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, this is the special one. It's actually been I've only had a few guests where I stumbled into, how we do as widows, you'll stumble into someone else's widow story and it just almost takes you back to your own story. Simultaneously, you feel like you're brought to the surface of all the emotions that maybe one might experience via grief. And so I was in your YouTube channel and I went down a rabbit hole and watched 100 videos. They were all so amazing. I thought they were spot on for where I was. I was actually prepping for another interview with a widow and came across your thing and was like, wow, this was super helpful for that interview. Anyway, so a lot came up and I ordered your book, and I have to say I've been knee deep in your book for the last, I could not put it down until I finished it. And I probably cried all week because it was so stunning. I told a lot of my widow friends that I thought it was the voice of everyone who's ever lost anyone and was trying to put their life back together, like the shattered puzzle pieces that you almost have to find first and then try to, make a whole new puzzle out of it. And it was just really awesome. So I want to thank you so much. His book he's got a lot of books. I've only read one of them. So talk to us a little bit about your story and just tell us a little bit about your background, because it is such a sensitive topic. And just a warning, we're going to be talking about suicide and child death. So if that's something that's going to trigger you today, you may want to look into some other episodes or maybe check out Abel's work in other areas on his YouTube channel or working with him as a coach. But go ahead. I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, so my story began, I guess, on a November afternoon when I arrived back at our apartment and heard a gunshot and found out that my 7-month pregnant wife had just shot herself. And it was unexpected, was not expecting. I knew she was having some issues just with her mental health in the pregnancy, but, suicide wasn't at the top of my mind by any stretch of the imagination. And so that's kind of where the story started. Kind of an unfortunate way to start a story. So my wife my late wife didn't survive, but she was 7 months pregnant at the time, and emergency help got there quick enough that they were able to save the baby. I guess I'm going to use that term loosely in the sense that, she was pretty much she was on life support her entire life. There wasn't any chance of her surviving. And after a couple of days, it kind of clicked with me that, that she's not going to grow up, I guess. And so, 9 days after she was born, I had to make the decision to take her off life support, and did that. And, and then I think at that point, I just found myself in this uncharted world. I felt like there was nobody out there that could understand me, nobody out there that could, that had been there. It didn't help the fact that I was 26 when this happened. So I was young. If I felt like, resources that people were pointing towards me were for old people, retired people. They'd always talk about, hey, remember, you're in your golden years, you can enjoy this. And I'm like, I'm 26, it's like my golden years are like 40 years off at this point. It's like, I don't have the, anyway, just in this world. I mean, I had friends that weren't even married at this point, and it was just me. And I just felt like I was, just in this world where nobody understood me. And so, Room for Two is, the book you mentioned is really the story that starts on the day that Krista died and goes through my year journey to the anniversary of her death, and kind of my I don't know, I guess my doing my best to put my life back together at that point. And that's what the book will take you through. And I appreciate the compliment that it really hits home. I guess, I don't think it matters how our spouse dies sometimes, just that feeling of loss and that feeling of, what am I going to do now, I think is universal. And it's something I've seen, talking to clients, is that this feeling of, give me some guidance, give me some direction, is pretty universal among those who have lost a spouse.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because you feel the loneliness that you felt is so poignant in the book. And I think that resonated deeply with me. I think it's challenging to be a young widower, because it is, the literature out there and the help is generally, really, resources are available for, as you said, like your golden years. And I remember, hilariously enough, I read a book one person gave me, and it's said I'd meet my future husband and, shopping for produce in a grocery store. And I thought to myself, like, I Amazon my groceries to my door because I have 2 kids and I literally I don't have time to and I'm like, whatever. And no men I know are shopping in the grocery store at all. Like, I guess I would be an older, maybe single man might do that. I don't know. It was funny. And I think that's like, it hits home to the point that, like, those who write these books are generally maybe in a larger demographic. And I think we fall in a smaller. And with suicide, I had a dear friend who lost his wife, who was a coworker of mine. She hung herself, and very similar. Like, no one knew, she didn't have any outwardly signs of depression. She took depression medication, but like normal, like a lot of people. And I remember when it happened, because my mom's brother committed suicide, nobody was talking to him about any of it, like almost like the elephant in the room. Everywhere he went, he couldn't have spaces to even like be comforted in the grief, it's like, and I thought that was really delivered honestly in your book. And I think it's really an honest and true thing that happens to people who experience suicide. It's like, also there's shame around it, where you can't even be consoled by people. And was interesting to me too, to think like how alone we all feel in grief, but like, especially when you add an accident, a suicide, a drug overdose, something that's, where someone maybe did something or that could have killed them, right? Versus like it happened to them. And that must have been really challenging, double challenging, because I think almost every widower feels extremely alone and like no one understands. Like the world keeps moving and you're like, stuck still, sort of how it feels.
Yeah. And I think at some point, though, that's where you've got to, I think at some point in the book, I said that, but I kind of felt like the world, people were slowly moving on, or at least life was going on. And I kind of realized if I wanted to move forward, I had to figure out, what is this next chapter going to look like? What is my chapter 2 going to look like? And I think I stumbled into success again. This was back, 2002, by the time I started dating again. And it was, there was not, again, the internet was in its infancy. There was not a lot of resources out there, and any resources were, again, geared towards old people. So, I like to say I stumbled into success, I guess, and figured things out. But it was, it was a lot of trial and error, and just, what am I going to do today? And okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else. And until I kind of figured out something that worked for me.
Yeah, actually, I think the process is completely different for younger people. I'm including myself in the younger, I was 46 when my wife passed away, but relatively young. And then like the next year, I had a good friend whose wife passed away, and he was 84, 85. And I reached out to him. He was a good friend, probably my best friend's dad. And I reached out to him and said, look, I just went through this, and I was recommending therapy and whatnot, and just let him know that I was there. And he told me, he said, David, I'm 85. Most of the people I've ever loved are dead. He was just a different, because I remember thinking that I was the only one, that had this terrible thing happen, and no one would understand. And it's very different when you're older. Now, I'm sure it's no easier. They were married for 50 plus years, but it's different. It's very different. to have your life yanked out from under you when you're in your 80s versus when you're in your 20s or 40s.
And I love that you said a lot of your friends weren't even married yet, right? So you
Yeah.
were already in like a space that some people didn't understand. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things that this journey has taught me, and maybe you can relate, is I don't think any of us are ever on this, when you become a widow, it isolates you to a place where you have to take yourself away. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your support system now versus like what boundaries and changes you had to make. Because it was clear in the book, Room for Two, that your family, you had to almost like not push them out. They were actually really like down the street from you, but like you had to put distance between yourself and your loved ones because the voices of others are really loud in that space. And still for us, we've been married just 2 years this summer. David lost his wife for, I think, 7 months when we started talking?
8 months. Yeah.
8 months. I'd been a year out, maybe a little over a year out. And so honestly, like maybe you feel like this with Juliana, but like we're still grieving and reprocessing and figuring out who we are post shatter together, which sounds like you guys did as well. And so like, how did you manage your support system? Because I think our listeners are always frustrated with their in-laws. They're frustrated with their parents, their siblings, their friends who kind of, it feels like to me, maybe to you, like are worried about them, but want things to stay the same. So they only know how to operate with like the Krista of your life, so your first spouse, versus Juliana, who's new and really good for you. But because of the shatter and the loss, you didn't just lose your wife, you lost your child too, which is like, I cannot even imagine literally, but both at once. So like double shatter for you. And you became a parent and lost that all in the same week, 2 weeks. Yeah. How did you did everything about you changed, and how did you handle your support system? And do you have advice that you give to your widows now for that like early days when everybody's misunderstanding you?
Yeah, so my support system, and again, I think friends and family, they had good intentions. I think, and I think most people come into this. I want to state that I think most people, they have good intentions how they're trying to support you, but unless you've kind of been there, done that, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, they're trying to support, but a lot of times they don't even know how to support you. And so they're just doing their best. So again, I was young, lost a wife, lost a kid, again, friends that aren't married, I can remember like what, my mom went to therapy, and I remember like she would come like after her therapy session, she stopped by the house and, oh, I had this great session. And she started talking to me about it. And she's like, oh, you really need to go see this guy. And I was just like, and again, good intentions there. I know that my mom was, she was not trying to, she was just trying to help, but I was like, Mom, this is the last thing I need right now. It's like, I'm glad it's helping you. I was like, I'm glad you're talking to somebody. I'm glad that's helpful. But it's like, I just know in my gut, I'm wasting my time if I go and talk to somebody. Right. So, so I had to kind of set up those boundaries. And I guess I just kind of, at some point, I just came to the realization that I had to figure this out on my own. And I hate to say it, but a lot of times, when I talk to clients, they're kind of in the same boat. It's like, again, people want to be helpful, or they're trying to be helpful, but what they're doing is not helping you. If anything, sometimes it can be pulling you back. And so, as you said, it's like, they're seeing a world without Krista in it. And especially when you start dating again, they're just like, wait a minute, what are you doing? This is a different thing. I'm still grieving. And so a lot of times it's just setting those healthy boundaries with people, even if they have good intentions, and letting them know that this is not helping. Right. But it's figuring out what helps for you. So in my case, I was kind of running before Krista died, but I had this thing where I'd get up every morning, right? And I would go run 4 or 5 miles. And that was my time to kind of process and compartmentalize things. And, if I had to think about Krista or Hope and kind of get things worked through, that's where I kind of do it. And then I'd kind of cut back from my run, kind of reset, and okay, I can go to work. I can, do all the other things I need to do today. And, I'd kind of go about it that way. Another thing that helped me was journaling. I, wrote some really detailed journals, which kind of helped with writing Room for Two, by the way, because I think, if you guys know that widow's fog that people kind of get in, you're just kind of going through the day. I don't think if I had written in my journal, I think some of those scenes in Room for Two wouldn't have been there, because I'm going through and reading this and I'm just like, oh, wow. It's like, wow, I really was, I was really going through some stuff. I'm reading this years after. And but I think it's, it's figuring out what really does help you. And it's different for everybody. So, like in my coaching sessions, for example, I'll sit down with them and I'll talk to them. It's like, well, let's talk about some things that you like to enjoy, or some things that maybe you want to do, whether it's hobbies or building things or helping people. What are some things that you can do to kind of help push through this a little bit and, you know, kind of set up I guess, your own support system. Because ultimately, you know, again, people have good intentions, but a lot of times it's not helpful, and you got to figure out what it is that's going to work for you.
It's interesting. I had sort of a widow mentor in the cancer walk, and Mary Catherine Rodriguez was her name, and she really helped me. She's actually became a therapist. Her husband was a dear friend of my first husband, Carl's, and he passed away from lymphoma, leukemia, and lymphoma. I think he had both. I might be saying that wrong. Sorry, Mary Kay, if I said that wrong. But he passed away from cancer, and they were very young, like you and Krista. And in the midst of it, like, he was doing a lot of treatments that would have him in isolation, and she was getting her doctorate in psychology. And she gave me this, I was struggling even then before he died about like the support groups, you know, and she said, you know, you'll have your life will be like lots of different circles. And in each circle, like, let's say your family and your deepest best friends. And then you've got like acquaintances, and you've got coworkers, and like, there's these bubbles in your life of how you have friends. And she said, when Carl dies, and even in this death walk, like, everything will shift for you. Like, some people in your family, dearest friend for life bubble, won't be able to be there for you. And I just want you to prepare for that. Like, and some random strangers will become like family for you, because you'll only be able to have in your bubble for a really long time those people who can be present to what you need in order to heal. And that has been actually like the most helpful advice. And I when I was reading your book, I was thinking about that. Like, you basically have to hold on to the people that can allow you to change, because you cannot, the minute that death happens, or deaths in your case, everything changes inside of you. Like, you are still the core essence of who you've always been, but like, you will never look at life the same. You will never function the same. You will never love the same. And you can't even breathe the same. Like, everything in your body changes, and life changes after that. And you can't stay the same. So those people cannot make the transition into the parts of you that have to go forward in the healing. They mean well, as you're saying. And so I'd like to even just say this to whoever might be listening that is a friend of mine who I've lost. I still love you very deeply and appreciate all we've been through. And I know Abel's probably saying the same thing. And I know David the same. We know that you have good intention. It's not your fault, you know, but we're different people now, and we have to be, because unfortunately the choice was taken from us when we lost our person that was in our old life that we chose to create an entire world with. When they went away, everything in that life went away. And I think that might help people to understand why we're so different, and why we need such different support and different people, and new love, especially because no matter what, the person isn't there anymore. And so often people want us to like black veil it. And I don't think they would ever say this out loud, because it's not in consciousness. It's like a subconscious thought that like, we're supposed to sort of die with them. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like, how could you move on? Does that mean you don't love Krista, that you decided to start dating again at 6 months? Talk to me a little bit about that, because I know this is what the widows out there want to know. They're all hiding that they're dating. We definitely hid that we were dating from everyone. I was scared to go to dinner. I'm
Yeah.
actually still hiding. Like, I think we go to our old worlds, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like very proud of my husband and our life that we're building. We work our asses off to be here. And our kids have never been doing better. I don't think I know through their healing and their peace that like, we are 100% doing the right thing for us. But it can pull up all this old stuff in the presence of your past. Talk to me a little bit about that for you.
Yeah, so you have to redefine relationships, especially as you start dating and fall in love again. And it is sad, and it is hard. I mean, I talk to clients, there's like, you know, I might lose the late wife's family, or, you know, I'm not going to have the same relationship with them. And I'm like, yeah, you're not going to have the same relationship with certain people. And it's almost like, again, you know, you've already lost somebody, and it's almost like you're losing somebody else, not to death, but you're losing them because, you know, life has changed. And, you know, when you have a new person in there, certain relationships have to be redefined, and you know, and it's hard. But again, if you want your marriage to succeed, if you want the relationship to succeed, you have to redefine these relationships. And I know I mean, I get it. I mean, you guys talked about, yeah, you know, you're kind of hiding the fact that you were dating. Yeah, I hid the fact I was dating. I mean, for, you know, the very first date I went on, I intentionally made it that it was like 50 miles away from where I live, because I was so paranoid about having to date somewhere where somebody was going to walk in and see me with this, you know, with this woman I was with. And, you know, I could just see, you know, oh my gosh, you know, they were going to run back and tell Krista or something that, oh my gosh, you know,
Right.
Abel's having, you know, and it's
An
just,
affair.
I mean, yes, yeah, you know, and it was completely irrational, but I think a lot of people feel that way because, and again, you know, and the thing is I wanted to tell people, but I was so worried about their reaction, and I was so worried about being judged that's why I hid it. And you know, again, you know, it's like, but you know, and I don't think I really knew at the time how do I go to somebody like Krista's family, or how do I go to my family and tell them, hey, you know, I'm dating again, and I just want you, you know, and because I think deep down I was worried that I wasn't, and again, it isn't that I expected people like to embrace the decision, you know, or anything like that, because everybody was on their own journey, but I think I was worried that I wasn't even going to get a little bit of understanding, that they were just going to look at me horrified, like, you know, did you not love Krista? You know, it's like, you know, it's been how many months, you know, I could see people doing stuff like that, and I was just worried.
Did some people do that to you? Because some people did that to me for sure.
Did they
say that stuff to you? Like, interestingly enough, like women, and I sure hope not to gender specify here, but I have found, because I'm married to a widower and I'm a widow, that women often like will be in his world situations, and I hear people being like, she's out to get his money and she's, you know, like all this stuff. And I'm like, I lost my husband and was supporting myself. I own my own businesses. Like, I didn't need him. I don't need his money. Like, we actually like bonded on love and loss.
So I have a little different take on why we hide. I think, at least for me, and maybe it was just the suddenness of the death.
Yeah.
Kind of like Krista, my wife, died in 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And I used to have these recurring dreams, and maybe you've had these too. In the beginning, I would have these recurring dreams where I was trying to tell Betsy that I was dating. I was, you know, I would see her and I would try to explain to her, hey, you know, we didn't work out, like almost like a divorce situation, you know. And I think part of my brain felt like that relationship hadn't ended, you know, and I didn't feel right. It felt like cheating, or it didn't feel right yet because I hadn't broken up, you know, with this person, and I was falling in love with this person, and carrying two loves at the same time can be very confusing in your, and I was worried that no one would understand that because I didn't fully understand it, you know.
Right, you don't really know that it's possible to love another person
at the same time. Yeah.
Well, the same way. And it's not the same way because they're a different person. So, right, that needs to be pointed out because it's different people. And so the loves are different, but the strength of them can feel as poignant or as passionate as it did. If maybe not more, because I actually think you value what you're putting into your relationship, what you're getting out of it more, because you know the fragility and how quickly it can be taken from you. So I actually think sometimes the second love is you put more energy towards it because you value it a lot more.
Yeah, I would say that, with, you know, with clients and stuff, those who have remarried, you know, I don't think they'll admit it in public, but their second marriage is usually better. And it's not like, you know, it isn't like they're dissing on their first marriage. It isn't like their first, you know, marriage was horrible, or that their second marriage is perfect. You know, they still run into the same issues we all run into. But I think it's more of, they do appreciate it more, you know, and they realize, oh, I've got a second chance. And a lot of people don't get that second chance. And so I think, you know, again, they won't admit it publicly, which is fine, but, you know, I mean, but I'll admit it. I mean, my second marriage is better than my first marriage. And it's, again, this is nothing against Krista or my first marriage. It's just, you know, I learned a lot from, you know, from losing Krista and moving on. And so I'm not repeating a lot of the mistakes that I made in my first marriage. And, you know, and going back to, you know, were people supportive or not? You know, I started dating again. I don't think anyone said to my face, "What are you doing?" But I could tell by their reactions they were thinking it, right? You know, I think, you know, people were I think people were more just surprised that I was dating again. And so I think it was, you know, I don't know, I guess looking back, they were probably too shocked to say, what the heck are you doing? They were more like, oh,
We were
you
so
know, but
young though.
yeah,
26 years old. And did you find that dating quickly, I mean, whatever. So I don't want to say the word quickly because I don't think that that's such a thing, but that's what the world says to people like us, that it's too soon. So let's put it in quotations. You're dating too soon. Tell me what it was for you that made you want to date again. Like, do you remember like what you were missing?
But yeah, well, it was just kind of this feeling. So I remember it was about 2 months after Krista died. I was getting ready for work one day, and I just had this, you know, it's like kind of this thing. It's like, oh, I should start dating again. And I was thinking, like, where did this thought come from? You know, I was just like, I was somewhat horrified, you know, that I even thought that. And I was like, wow, you know, that's weird. You know, why am I thinking that? And so I kind of ignored it and put it away, but the feeling kept growing and growing. It's just something that wouldn't go away. So, you know, it's not anything specific, but I will say it's, especially with men, it's a little bit different with women, but I see it a lot with widowers, is that a lot of them, you know, they do date fairly quickly. I guess I'm using that term, you know, but you know, a lot of them do date within months after, or sometimes even weeks after their late wife passes. And I think a lot of it just has to do is they just don't handle loss as well as women do. And not that loss is any less difficult, but I just think when, you know, they lose their wife, they lose a lot of their identity with it. And so I had someone tell me once, and I think it's a good analogy, is that they view their life as broken. And so men tend to be fixers. And so they think, well, how can I fix my life? Right. So they go out and start dating again. And to be fair, I don't think anybody's ready when they start dating again after you lose a spouse. Some are more ready than others. I was definitely not very ready, but you know, some people are more ready than others, but I just think it's, you know, they're trying, especially in the case of men, they're trying to fix their life. And so what I see a lot, especially when I talk to women who are dating widowers, they're dating these men who want a relationship, but are not emotionally ready for a relationship or mentally ready for a relationship. And so I'm kind of walking them through, well, let's talk about this and let's figure out, is he really ready for a relationship, or is he just looking for someone, you know, I guess it's what I call companionship. Is he just looking for someone just to kind of be part of his life and kind of replace the late wife?
There's so much to talk about. That's so true. And I think, I also think too, like if you look at the nervous system and how we're designed as humans, like we often, because we're such intellectual beings and the brain has developed so significantly as we've evolved, we're constantly in our front brain, right? Like all this part of our brain, which is the thinking and the analyzing piece that makes us human. But like we forget the other piece that makes us human is connection. And so partnership and connection with others. And so, you know, when you lose your connection and your intimacy life because death has taken your person from you, you lose a sort of a sense of safety in a way. Like I think there is safety in the vulnerability and being connected with someone in a deep way that gets to see this unique side of you that you don't necessarily share with your family and your friends. And it's important, I think, sometimes that we remember that we're humans and we're meant to be in communion and in relationships with others. And I think when you've lost everything else, you want that back, and you miss being in a family and being a part of something like that. Just like anyone, like a girlfriend seeking a husband or a boyfriend seeking a wife, like a lot of our formative years in our adolescence is to seek, you know, permanent partnerships for a lot of us. I mean, not for everybody, but for a lot of us. And I think that's a lot of our human design is to have that sort of foundation and create a home and build a life together. And so it's interesting when you think about it.
Yeah. And so, you know, for those who are listening, you know, there's nothing wrong with wanting that, you know, so, you know, I encourage people to, you know, if you feel like you want to date, go out and date, but I just kind of caution against maybe getting into a serious relationship quickly. You know, it's usually just go on a couple of casual dates and kind of see how you're feeling about things. And, you know, you can kind of gut check it from there. But, you know, I think the mistake I see a lot, and it's a mistake I made, is I got into a serious relationship fairly quickly. This wasn't with Julie. This was with somebody else. And, you know, I got into a relationship, I guess, had I been maybe thinking a little bit more, I wouldn't have got into it. But again, it was that need, you know, that need for, you know, having someone in my life. I mean, I missed coming home. You know, I come home to an empty house and it was awful, you know, and it's like, you know, I wanted somebody to talk to. I wanted somebody to share my day with. I missed not having the ability to do that with Krista. I missed hearing about her day. You know, I came home from work and it was just like, well, this sucks. I've got, 4 or 5 hours and it's like, what am I going to do with this time? And I think, dating and relationships, they can help fill that void, but I think you have to be in a mentally healthy place or an emotionally place where you can, kind of work through that grief while still open your heart to someone else.
How did you, like, what do you find are the biggest mistakes that widows and widowers make when they first start dating?
I think the biggest mistake is getting into a serious relationship too quickly. That's by far the biggest mistake. But I think the second big mistake they make is not letting people know about it. And again, we've kind of talked about the reasons for that. Yeah, and again, it's not necessarily that you have to go to people and it isn't like you're asking their permission, but the issue I see is that your dating eventually comes out. You can't hide this forever. Like I have clients with kids and they think they're hiding it from their kids. And I'm talking like maybe teenagers or preteens here. And I'm like, they know. I'm like, it's like dad goes out every Friday night and, it's like, kids are smart and they kind of put it together. They see patterns. And so the reason that hiding it is a mistake is because when it does come out, people feel kind of betrayed and there's that trust issue there. And it's like, how come you didn't trust me enough to at least tell me what you were doing? And so it even causes more problems. So again, it's, I think there's a right way to do it. I don't think you go in and ask people's permission to do it, but I think you, on a high level, you need to at least let them know, that, hey, I'm dating again, or if you're seeing someone seriously, that, hey, I'm seeing someone. And again, it's not a permission discussion, but I think especially like if you have kids or, you have close family that you interact with frequently, they kind of need to know because not knowing and having the fallout from that is usually worse than them finding out, than you telling them that.
And I also, don't you think too, like it's so important that.
So I think I'm keeping tabs for us.
What do you mean?
We're 1 for 2 so far. So we definitely got into a serious relationship pretty quickly.
We did,
but we were pretty open with our family and kids. I mean, I was with the kids.
Definitely. And I was pretty open with my tight friends. I would say, one of the things that you said was true for me. I was extremely worried about what people would think about and question my love for Carl. And, it's funny because your book ripped open my grief about Carl. I don't talk about this a lot on the show, but I guess I may have touched on it, but when he died, even though he had a 5-year cancer battle, there was definitely multiple moments. He was given less than 6 months to live. He was given a year to live when he was diagnosed in 2014 and he died in 2019. So there were so many moments where I thought he was going to die, but he always found this way to we laughed and called him a phoenix. He would just rise back up and he'd find a way to overcome it. And he'd open a new restaurant. He would do these big, crazy things that most people couldn't do in cancer. And so that was constantly the reinforcement from everyone was how out of body basically his whole walk was. But inside his body, obviously, behind the scenes, what people didn't see, there was a lot of bleeding and scary and PTSD kind of things, really hard things he was going through and fighting against in our home. And so when he did die, I almost had this, and so did my son. My youngest was a little too young to process, honestly. I think she was just 5 when he died. So, and he is sick her whole life. So I think she didn't know any different. For her, it was a different experience. But my son and I both felt like we had a sudden death in our house because he just was fine one day, literally cooked dinner, through this big dinner party. And then the next day I didn't talk again and then died 2 weeks later. So it was weird in that he always had this alive spirit. I'm losing my train a little bit, and I felt like everybody, we had such a powerful love story that people would think if I dated again, that wasn't true. And I was thinking in your book, there's not a single day that doesn't go by where I'm not thinking about him or loving him or seeing my children having quiet thoughts about it. My daughter has his hands to a literal T. I look at her hands and it can sometimes take my breath away. The way they move, the way she holds them, even the way she picks her little nails. So exactly like he would do. And I think David feels the same about his daughter. We have these little and I hope would have been the same for you, like these little people that look just like this person. And like, there's no, even if you don't have any of that, like, I know Chris is on your heart, what, almost every day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, but it's, it's like I tell, like I tell clients, it's like, 99.6% of my heart is for Julie, and for our marriage and our relationship. And that's what it takes for our marriage to succeed. I mean, we'll be celebrating our 21st anniversary next week. So, yay,
Amazing.
but
good job, guys. Good job.
But the reason,
good job to your wife. I know she,
yeah, she's had to put up with a lot of unique
experiences.
Hard.
It's really hard. I can speak from the widow perspective. Like, I know I'm a widow, but I'm also a wife to someone who is married to someone else. And there's fragility in that. And like, people can look at it as jealousy, and that's not what it is. It's just like, it's not a divorce. Like, you lost a person that you really still loved and would still be married to. And so that puts a interesting perspective on, like, now being with a new person, you're like, now how do I fit in this picture? Like, am I secondary? Am I primary? Or are we here only because of loss?
And who you're with now, and those are normal feelings, right? Because I think when I talk to women, they're like, well, am I a replacement? Is he ever going to love me as much? And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for 99.6% of someone's heart. I think that's a fair expectation, because they're here now, right? I mean, and again, this isn't, it isn't like you're disrespecting your late spouse, but you're always going to have triggers, right? Whether it's through your kids or random memories or a song, you're going to get triggered, and there's nothing wrong with the triggers, but it's how do you handle the triggers, right? Can you have that moment where you can, again, appreciate and think about the late spouse, but then just kind of move forward with your life. And
how have you put that into a 0.4 percentage category? Like, tell me your advice, because I do think maybe we're in the early years. I mean, you're 21 years in, as you're about to say, and we're year 2. And so I would say that the grief is a little bit heavier. And sometimes, like, David just went through the anniversary of Betsy's death, and it drew up all my grief and his grief. And so, like, in it, sometimes we still get so consumed by the triggers, and then the loneliness creeps in for both of us, where we're like in our old marriage in our head, but in our new marriage in our house. Does that make sense? Like, how have you guys managed that?
It takes a lot of work, and there were some rough patches, I think, when Julie and I were first married. I mean, there's definitely some rough patches as we were figuring this out, right? Because Julie kind of told me when we were dating, when she was finally like, okay, I'm willing to kind of make this work. 'Cause she had concerns. I mean, again, she was 23 when we were dating, and 20-year-olds, you don't think about dating widowed people. So she was, when she finally reached a point where she was like, okay, I will give this a shot, she made it very clear to me that the only way that this was going to work is if she could be number one. And again, she wasn't asking me to forget Krista or the marriage, but she was saying, I need to feel like number one in your heart. And if I feel like, that you're mentally or whatever elsewhere, this isn't going to work, and I will walk from the relationship. She said it much nicer than that, but that was kind of the,
but I applaud her for being able to say that at 23 years old. Like, that's a smart girl who knows who she is.
Yeah. And so, and I kind of went home a little bit upset, I'll be honest. I went home a little bit upset, like, oh, what do you think? But then I kind of thought about it, and I kind of thought, well, that's not an unfair request. Like when Krista was alive, the same expectation was there. She wanted to be number one. So I was like, well, why should Julie settle for anything less? So
that was literally the poll into your YouTube that got me like way in, is you were talking about that very same thing, that like setting boundaries with family and friends that basically were kind of criticizing I don't know if you were talking about another couple or yourself, but basically criticizing your wife in a certain sense. And you were saying like, it's my obligation to give this 100% and protect her the same way I would in my first marriage. And I thought that was so crazy. It was so smart, because you were saying like, why in the world does anyone else outside of our own marriage think that the second person deserves less? Like, all relationships deserve the same kind of attention. If you're committing to it, you're committing to it. And it's challenging for some reason when death comes in, because people can't, as your title, which I think is literally amazing, can't find room for two, which there has to be. And it really is when you're saying room for two, you really mean room for one, but the other little piece of your heart will always hold on to the past.
Right. Yeah. And so like, I think the biggest issue that we had to deal, I mean, there was stuff again about anniversaries, and like, I can remember the first Memorial Day where we were together when we were married, she was like, do do you want to go to the cemetery? Do you need to do something? And I was like, no, I'm good. You know, it's like, you know, I don't need to go to the cemetery, you know, but she was, was trying to find that, that balance of, what was acceptable, what did I want to do, what did I not want to do. It was just kind of a lot of hit and miss. But I think the biggest issue, again, was my anger towards Krista. I was angry towards Krista, and I think she could tell that the anger was, slowly dissipating. But there'd be times where I'd get triggered somewhere. She wouldn't know what would trigger me, but she could see my jaw clench. She could kind of see me tense up, and she knew what I was going through. Right, is that I was angry at Krista. I was something that triggered me. I was working through something, and so it was her thing of like, well, how do I kind of deal with that? And we kind of just reached the thing where she would just kind of leave the room. She's like, I'm just gonna let Abel deal with this. I don't need to be here. Sweet. She'd come back in 10 minutes and everything was fine, kind of thing. But I think it was just, there's, again, unique things that come up when you've lost a spouse in a relationship that don't come up in normal relationships. And I think it was, again, trying to find that balance of, in my case, I kind of had this mantra in my head is what I'm doing or about to do or say or whatever, is it going to hurt our marriage or is it going to help our marriage? Right. And so a lot of times if I was triggered, like, you kind of put that thought in my head, and I would just kind of say, okay, I wanted to say something about Krista. I'm not going to say it because this is not going to help our marriage. This isn't going to help things. And I would just kind of, process it in my head and move on. But a lot of times with the anger, it wasn't like I could just process it in 5 seconds and move on. It was kind of like I had to kind of sit there and work through it. And so again, I think it was just us, Julie realizing that what I was doing, this wasn't personal towards her. It wasn't about our marriage. It was just that, there was a lot of anger and forgiveness that I had to kind of work through, and eventually did. It took 6 years to get there, but I think it was
how have you worked on your anger? Like, I think I went on that little tangent and I realized, like, when you're saying this, that was what I was getting to, was like this fight. I was super angry because I felt abandoned by Carl in lots of ways. And, I've been abandoned by my father. And so sometimes I've got some issues about, abandonment. Not sometimes, all the time I have issues about abandonment. Let me not underplay that. And it's constantly like a thing. And so it's interesting, like, my husband unmeaning to, but abandoned me. And I was furious for the first year. And I remember reading your book thinking like, okay, like I remember the fire within was so strong. I was angry about everything, feeling so alone in my grief and being left behind our 2 kids. And so talk to me a little bit about your anger. How have you managed it? Like, how did you get to a place? Is it something like, I read your book and I know it's just your first, so I have to keep going. So I'm sure you have lots more in the posts, because this is like your first year of grief. Obviously I'm like reading your OG book first, but did you just close the box on it? Or did you, like, now that you're saying 6 years, I'm feeling better, because I was like, how the fuck did he just like go away from the cemetery and never look back? Like, you're like, I'm never going back there again. And I was like, you're a badass. Tell me how you're doing that. Well, I cannot go there a lot,
Yeah. Because, I think it really came down to, again, it came down to, the reason I decided not to go back to the cemetery was, again, it was putting my relationship with Julie first. Right. And again, it's been, I got to do the math here. It's been, I think, 22 years since I've been to the cemetery. And it's like, again, this isn't anything against Krista or the marriage. It was again about priorities in my mind, and, would going to the cemetery hurt or help my relationship? Everybody's different, but in my case, I determined that was not going to be helpful for my marriage. And so I kind of realized, as I'm driving away, if you read Room for Two at the end there, it's like, I'm not going back. And I just kind of realized it's like, I've got to kind of move forward with life. And for me, this is a helpful thing not to go back. And, again, I think people can, I can think about Krista in my own way and have my own thoughts about her and think about her, but, I don't need to go to the cemetery to actually, to remember her. And I just kind of decided at that moment, it's like, no, I'm going to focus on Julie. But, you talk about the path to forgiveness. If you read The Wife in the Next Life, that's where I actually get into a little bit to
I'm obsessed with your writing. You're an incredible writer. You really are a beautiful writer.
That's where you get into a lot of Julie's head about the issues that she's dealing with, like, how can Abel love 2 people? How can we do this? But I kind of detailed the forgiveness story in that book. And really, again, it took 6 years to get there, but it was kind of it wasn't like I just kind of realized it overnight. It was a long journey. I didn't want to be angry at Krista. I really didn't. I loved her, and the fact that I was so mad and so angry at her, I hated that. That wasn't, because it's so weird. It's like I loved her, but at the same time, I blamed her for a lot of stuff, and I just had this intense anger, and I hated being angry. I didn't want to, but at the same time, I didn't know. It's like, how do you get rid of that anger? And again, I don't think, I wish I could tell people, hey, this is how you get rid of the anger. I wish I could, because then I'd be like a billionaire or something like that. Right. It's an individual journey, and it took 6 years to get there. And I guess, it was me, I think it was a constant effort when I would get triggered and I would get angry. It was just kind of slowly working through it and just telling to myself, there's some things, we're not always going to get answers. It's going to be okay. And just, I don't know, it was just kind of a mental process. And slowly those episodes of anger, they became fewer and farther between. I think, when I was, probably first dating Julie, they were probably almost daily. I was mad every day. But, soon it became weekly and then monthly. And I think by the time, I was hitting this, the 6 year mark, it was probably been months before I'd been angry again. And actually what triggered my final anger episode, it was Halloween. It was Halloween night. I'm driving home from work. I'm at a stop sign a couple blocks from my house, and these kids are crossing the street, and there's this girl dressed as a princess. And for some reason, I thought in my mind, Hope would be about that age. I could see her dressed as a princess, and just anger, I'm gripping the steering wheel, and I'm just furious, and I hadn't been angry in months and months. And I kind of sat there, and I kind of thought to myself, why, 6 years and I'm still mad. I was just, upset. Anyway.
But it's so much love, that was taken. And like, obviously, that she wasn't in her right headspace, as most people are when they commit suicide. They actually truly believe that the world is better off without them, I think. And I think it's hard to put your head in that space, especially, she's pregnant and like carrying your child. I just can't even imagine. And it's normal to be angry at your spouse when they die. I was enraged, and Carl was the most loving person, always supported me in everything. And like everything he did, he was doing with intention to leave a legacy and help my family. A lot of those choices he made in fear. And, when you make decisions out of fear, then in your young 30s, sometimes that can turn out really poorly.
I'm still angry.
David struggles with anger a lot.
Yeah. And, and again, it's okay to be angry. The issue isn't, I always tell people it's okay to be angry. It's what are you doing to work through the anger, right? And can you eventually like I had a client once, he's like, I'm 2.5 years into this. I'm still angry. And he didn't know my story all the way. And I was just like, you're 2.5 years. I was like, it took me 6 years. And he didn't know that. He's like, oh, I didn't realize it took you that long. It's like, and again, I'm not prescribing a time frame, but I could definitely see progress over those 6 years. And so after that moment of just kind of just rage, I guess, at seeing that girl dressed up, I drove home. I think Julie could kind of tell when I got home that I was a little bit off, but, she's like, everything okay? I'm like, I'm fine. I'll just take the kids trick-or-treating. So, I took the trick-or-treating, came back, and it was sitting at the table. Again, we had 3 kids at the time. They were pretty young. They're just sitting there eating candy. And there was this moment where I just felt peace. And I just kind of realized at that point that I had forgiven Krista. And I think it was just maybe seeing my new family, seeing what it was I was blessed with, and realizing, it's fine. And since that moment, I've not been angry at her. I haven't had a single moment of anger since then. But it was 6 years of work to get there. And so so David, if you're still mad, that's fine. If you're still angry, Alex, if you're still mad, it's okay. But it's I guess my thing would be is, what are you doing to work through the anger in a positive way? And do you feel like you're at least making progress? Because I think at some point, if we want to forgive our spouses, or forgive ourselves, or whoever it is we're trying to forgive, we can get there. But I just think it's sometimes a long, hard road, and it's one day at a time sometimes. And but I think as long as we're being intentional about trying to forgive that person, or forgive ourselves, it's something that we can do. But it's it's just something that you have to slowly work on. And then also, I guess, is especially if you're married or in a long-term relationship, make sure that that your anger is not interfering with your relationship. Find a positive way to kind of deal with it.
That's a double-edged sword, because that's the crux of it, right? But it's also the motivation to get it done and to figure it out and to forgive, because I think that if I was alone, I would just probably sit in it. I would just be angry. But my anger compromises our relationship, and our relationship means the most. It's the biggest thing to me, and I don't want to compromise that. And I want to do the work that needs to make it work, because it's really wonderful.
But I think it's really hard, right? Like, you guys have a lot of unresolved, and so do I, a lot of unresolved feelings with someone that isn't alive anymore. And so when this person dies, like, and like, especially for both of you that had quick deaths, I mean, I did have an opportunity, thank God. I think I have a little bit less regrets than David, because if anything, I regret I pushed and pushed and pushed Carl to talk about death, and he didn't want to. Like, he really didn't want to. He wanted to think in his mind, he thought he would die if he thought the word death. Like that, a lot of people tell you that in cancer, like, if you even think you're going to die, you're going to die. Like, it's like, mind is the one that's controlling you. And I think in some ways our mind is controlling us. It's interesting that you said that, like, you peace came over you. It also says that you're talking to yourself in your anger. One of the things I've noticed across the board with every guest I've had here in a waking up moment, and like, waking up doesn't mean we're like living this perfect life. Clearly I'm crying. David's crying. We're all getting emotional here, because there's still so much to resolve and so much to work through. 21 years out, 5 years out, 4 years out, the stages of grief never stop. But I would say that it's interesting that every single guest seems to have this self-talking or self-mantra or self-work. So you have to almost love yourself, believe in yourself, tell yourself that it's going to be okay, or you're going to work through it. Like, it's a positive affirmation inside of yourself so that you can find some healing.
Well, I think without that, it's death. Death without that for a widower. If you can't tell that's why I started dating, was I made a conscious thought that I wanted to live. I did not want to die, and I wanted to live and love. Yeah.
And I think the way that you're handling it is I think is really good, David, because you talked about, I'm still angry, but you understand what the most important thing is. It's not letting that anger interfere with your marriage to Alix, right? Because that would be death to your marriage, right? And so, I think it helps that you're both widowed. I think there's a little more understanding there when those moments come up that maybe a lot of my clients don't have, because usually they're not dating widowed people, they're dating non-widowed people. So
it's usually good. Sometimes it can be bad when his triggers and my trigger, his grief and my grief bang against each other. It can be a little colossal.
Well, and the kids add a wrinkle, because you. Like, even if my anger goes away, we're still going to have Carl and Betsy in our lives forever,
right?
With our children, and probably more than 0.4%, because, when we look at our kids, we see.
Well, and they want to talk about their parent. They want to know, they want to tell stories, like, we've got ranges. It's similar to your family. We've got 19 all the way down to 10. And it's, like, they will talk about, a lot of their world is their primary parent, and everybody's doing actually really well blending, shockingly enough, but that's taken a lot of work. But
blending is a whole nother
that's a podcast in itself. But I was thinking about when you said you were sitting with your 3 new younger children, which I know you have 7 children, right?
Correct.
So that's amazing, Abel.
Yeah, it is amazing. So we have 5 in the house, and I'm like, actually, people are always like, how are you doing that? And I'm like, it's actually amazing. Like, I think when family was taken from me, and maybe you felt the same way after Hope died, like, I wanted nothing more than family. Like, I love having children. I love being able to provide them safety. I love being a mom figure, like, even to my stepkids. Like, I love that even though their mom died on Valentine's Day that I was able to, like, leave them some candies and a love note and tell them that I'm thinking of them, and call my stepdaughter and check on her, because we all need, I was thinking about that. Like, we all need a parental figure. We all need that kind of love and support. Even if I'm not her mom, I'll never be her mom, or their mom, but I will always be a mom figure. And I just, it's really important to me. And I'm sure you too, family. I think it's the most important.
Yeah, and I think it's knowing what you want in a chapter too. It doesn't always have to include a relationship, but I think that's one of the things I see with my widowed clients. A lot of times, when I'm talking to them in a coaching session, I'll ask them. I was like, "Well, what do you want in chapter 2?" And I kind of get this deer in the headlights look. It's like, I don't know what I want. But I mean, again, I kind of knew that I did want to get remarried. I knew I wanted kids again. So, I knew I wanted a family. So I had something to kind of work towards. But I think that's kind of, again, you talk about the healing process and moving forward. It's part of that is really knowing what it is that you want. And a lot of times I have to tell clients, it's like, before we can really progress here, you need to take some time and you need to really figure out what you want your next chapter to look like.
That's my entire second chance. If I had to wrap it up in a statement, it's literally deciding what I wanted.
Yeah.
In a way that I mean, you were young, you probably maybe never asked yourself what you wanted when you were in your 20s. I didn't ask myself what I wanted until I was in my 40s. And now I do pretty much nothing but ask myself daily, hourly, what do I really want? What do I want?
Yeah, what's really important?
What's important to me, right?
Right. And as we get older, what's important changes, right? So, what's important to me at 26 is different than, I'm in my late 40s now. So it's, if Julie was to die, and I hope she doesn't, but if she was, what is kind of important and what this next chapter would look like is different. And it's just because I'm older, and circumstances are different. So I always tell my clients, it's not, I don't prescribe a chapter 2 to anybody, but it's like, you've really got to be honest with yourself and say, at this point in my life, at this age, if I have kids or not kids, or, small kids, adult kids, what is it that I really want this next chapter? And once you kind of figure that out, then you can really start getting some guidance and direction. Well, what's the best way to go out and achieve that? I always say it's just like, if you read the book Alice in Wonderland, there's a scene where she gets to the Cheshire Cat, and there's all these paths everywhere, and she's like, she looks at the cat and says, well, which way should I go? And the cat's like, well, where do you want to go? And she's like, I don't know. And she's like, and then the cat says, well, it doesn't really matter which way you go then, pick any path you want. And so, but I think it's that point of, again, figuring out, taking some time and figuring out what it is that you want. I think at a high level, I knew I wanted to get married again. I wanted kids. I don't think I got more specific than that, but I kind of, I think as I got into dating a little bit, I was like, well, this is something that I want. So I've got to kind of date to actually get this. But I think it's just figuring out what it is this next chapter looks like. And it's different for everybody, and understanding there's not like one path that you have to take, but it's really understanding where is it that I want to get to. And then once you know that, it's a little bit easier to start making decisions and choices that can lead you in that direction. Yeah.
Abel, I don't want to spill the beans, because maybe we're not ready to.
What?
But I'm curious, how do you?
Alex's face here is like, wow.
It's exactly where we're going. How do you deal, or what have you revealed, and how did you reveal to your family chapter 2 about chapter 1? Like, in their lives, who are these half brothers, half sisters, and I'm curious, how much have you talked to your kids about your prior marriage and
so all of my children are aware that I was married before. They're aware that they have a half sister that's deceased. So they all understand that. Again, if you read The Wife in the Next Life, there's actually, I just kind of buttoned it up and didn't really say anything to our kids when they were younger. And, Julie was the one that actually kind of brought it up, and this kind of surprised me a little bit. But one night, she was like, we need to tell the kids about this. And I was kind of like, well, you're the one, I'm trying to make you number one. I'm trying to do this. And she's like, well, and she was like, they're going to find out. I'd rather have them find out from us than have them find out from somebody else or the internet, because you got stuff on the internet, they're going to figure this out. So let's,
Were you already in grief work at this point? Like had you already written the Room for Two?
I think I was writing. Well, let's see. I think I had written Room for Two, but I also thought that was going to kind of be the end of it. I really wasn't planning on any things after that. But so she's like, this is going to come out. How do we talk to the kids about it? And again, you can get the whole story in The Wife in the Next Life. But
we're on it this week.
Yeah. So, but honestly, all my kids know that. I know my oldest four have read Room for Two, so they're aware of the details and stuff. And I, I think it's important, especially where it's public like that out there. I don't want them to get blindsided by my story, so to speak, right? So, but the younger three, they know I was married. They know my late wife killed herself. They know they have a half sister, and Krista does come up in conversations from time to time. It isn't like she's, it isn't like it's a forbidden subject. She doesn't come up a lot, but there are times where Krista comes up, and I can remember like once again, the kids were younger and we were driving around, and I can't remember how it came up, but we were talking about somebody being sick and they may not make it, and like my oldest kid piped up and said, well, that's how your wife died. She was sick, right? And so it's kind of like, well, yeah, she wasn't like physically sick, it was more of a mental sickness. So yeah, so they are aware of it. Again, some more than others. And, I do, I'm not going to force them to read my books or anything, but, I know the oldest four have read Room for Two. And I think that kind of answered a lot of questions and just kind of did stuff for them. But, questions do come up once in a while, or they ask something. And I think, the most frequent question is, hey, am I going to have a sister in heaven or something like that? And it's like, yeah, you're going to have a sister in heaven. And, and so, again, it's not a frequent topic of conversation, but they're aware of it. But again, I think it's more of, we want them to know how, it's kind of an important part, so they understand mine and their mom's relationship, right? They understand kind of, how this came about.
Yeah.
And
I think it's really important too, like how, I know you call her Julie, I keep wanting to say Juliana, but how Julie was able to hold space in this way. And I'm not saying that widows are hard to love, but I think we are kind of hard to love. I think we actually love harder than most people. So for those considering dating a widow out there, like maybe hard parts of it, but don't you feel like to date a widow, like you have to be very strong. You have to be very strong and be able to hold a lot. And I think like what a testament to your children's mother, to both of you for being fortuitous in your grief journey and strong. And then even I think like sharing is really hard. It's not always easy because as you can see today, like we're constantly in the emotion of it. And so we're not suppressing it. We're not only just dealing with it, we're trying to help others deal with it because it's lonely and it's hard. When you have this knowledge, you almost feel like evangelical about it, where you're like, I need to share some of this so that other people in our station back there might have a glimmer of light in this hard thing. But I kind of wanted to end on, because I know we're hitting about an hour, but I wanted to end to ask you, like, how have you found, so you said like you forgive her in your heart and essentially this peace came over you. How have you seen, like, as I like to say, the ripples, a little bit of a cheesy branding topic, but like with the company Wake, it's really about like the energy that we leave behind us or the energy that we're putting into our life. Like sometimes it's subconscious, but sometimes it's really conscious. And I think when you're awake or you're mindful or you're alive and you're making conscious choices like you and Julie are to live, the ripple effect from those choices of living fully really are wide and vast. And I was just wondering, like, forgiveness, I think, is something that Dave and I are in the midst of working on deeply. And we're wondering, like, how did the forgiveness and the peace that came from that for you ripple into your marriage, into your life?
Well, I think it made the marriage a lot easier because it took out a lot of the issues, just not that it was a daily issue, but again, just, Julie sees me tense up. Okay, Abel's having a moment. I got to kind of step away. It was kind of nice to be able to kind of remove that from the marriage. Right. And, but I think I think overall it just made me a happier person, and not that I wasn't happy before or anything like that, but I think just, having that weight off your shoulders and not having to bear that burden anymore, I think it just makes life more enjoyable and life a lot better. And so, I don't think it's like a conscious, like we would notice it, like notice other than the anger issues. I don't think there's like a specific thing, but I think just me just not having that burden and carrying it around just makes it easier for me to focus on Julie. It makes it easier for me to focus on our kids. It makes it, it makes it easier. I think the kids can, at least my older kids, I think that they would be able to tell you that, yeah, they can see that they could probably tell a difference, right? Dad's not tensing up. Dad's not doing this, dad's more there. He's more, he's more present,
Yeah.
I guess. And so I think just being more, I think that's probably the biggest ripple effect, is just being able to just not to have that burden and not to have that weight on my shoulders and have to make that part of our a marriage anymore. And again, I'll say it's something that anybody can get to. Again, it takes work. It's not something that, you just can't, I want to forgive this person, I'm going to forgive them. It's, we're talking about really heavy things here. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with being angry, but do you have a plan, and are you working towards trying to, either forgive yourself or forgive this person for what happened? And I think, again, with conscious effort, you can get there, but I would definitely say it's,
and I love that you
having that in my marriage is good.
Good.
Yeah.
I love that you were journaling too. I feel like that is something that we can tell the listeners. David has also recently found journaling to be extremely helpful for his anger. And even just, I think, as you said, reflection, when he looks at it, it's funny when you write, you can write, when you're free writing, you can write without like grammar or worrying about that stuff. Like just so much of your, I think, subconscious brain goes on paper. And then when you read it or reread it, you're like, wow, you can really see patterns and things that are of value that you're feeling that maybe you hadn't noticed in the past, or it's not in your conscious brain. So it's really, really powerful. I just am so grateful that you came to talk to us. And I actually would love to have you like co-contribute or do a retreat with us. I think you're incredible. And
yeah, I would like to say I find you tremendously inspiring.
Ditto.
I was shooting for way less than 6 years, but that's probably more realistic.
He was trying to do it in 6 months.
For all the right reasons, but it's a process. It takes, when my wife first died, people told me, "Oh, don't worry, you're going to be fine. It just takes time," and it's true. It does take time, but it doesn't just take time. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a really caring and loving partner and spouse that can be there for you.
Well, and I think don't discount self-love, like I think it's interesting that you guys are talking about forgiveness. And one of the things is like, I recognize that I'll never get closure with the goodbye from Carl. There's a lot of things I'll never get closure on, but in my anger, what I had come to after 10 years of therapy, I was like, I have to forgive myself. I did the best I could. And I didn't know, I always am looking at my grief from my now lens, which is like, you'll have these ahas about your healing space and journey. And the more you learn about grief and the more you learn about yourself, the more you understand yourself in grief. And so you're looking from the now point to the you back then that didn't have that knowledge base and wasn't as experienced and wasn't taking the time to be introspective, right? Like just autopiloting through life like I was, and taking maybe for granted some of the simplicities and complexities of love and marriage and family. And now to look back, it's easy for me to judge the then person. And I think that we have to forgive the self first. And I wonder if when we forgive ourselves, then our heart is open to say, like, if it's harder to forgive me because I'm harder on myself than I am on others. So maybe then you extend to Krista, Betsy and Carl, where letting them be, because we have to remind ourselves. And I just wrote a blog about this. It's like, we're human. We're humans and we're constantly making mistakes. And when death happens, you just need that forgiveness and closure and perfection, or to be able to word it out. But the truth is, even if we had the opportunity to have one more conversation, who's to fucking say that we would get all the things we need, even in that? There's not always words for what we need from them. It's a lifetime of forgiveness, and it comes from inside of us, I think.
Yeah. And I like your thing about closure. It's like, you know what, I'm never going to get close. I don't know why Krista, I don't know why she did it, but that's, but at the same time, it's like, we don't get answers to a lot of questions in life. And so, I think for me, again, part of the forgiveness journey was just accepting that. It was like, you know what, I'm not going to get closure. And just realizing that's just a fact of life. Would I like closure? Oh, sure. I would love closure, but it's not going to happen. And at least not in this life. And so, so it's just something that,
it's a Ram Dass. You gotta be here.
I've accepted it and moved on, but that doesn't mean I can't be happy. Just because I haven't had closure doesn't mean I can't have a happy chapter 2. Doesn't mean I can't, forgive her. Right. And so, if there are people out there that are working, or they're saying, well, I don't get closure. It's like, oh, that's okay. Sometimes we just don't get closure, but that doesn't mean you can't have a plan and you can't figure out what you want in chapter 2 and be happy again.
Right. You can move on, and you just, I think one of the things about not having closure that can happen in a lot of relationships is like, you have to be here now, as Ram Dass would say, which means like you have to live in your now life. So if we continually live in our past life, we're not living in our now life. And then we're in two losses, and we know better than that as widows, that we get to do something that they did not get to do, which is live the rest of our life out as long as we have to live it. And we don't know when that's going to end, but we do know that we have now, and that's all we have. And so sometimes when I feel like I'm stuck, that's what I return to, is like my most important legacy and gift I can give to Carl for closure for us both is that I promise to live my life fully because he didn't get the opportunity to do so, whether that's through choice, suicide, or it's through cancer. It's still death. And I think that we are still alive, and we owe it to them and to ourselves to live fully, whatever that means.
Yeah. And I think that's the best way to honor your late spouse, is to live and have a happy life. Because I think, that's what they'd want. Yes. Yeah. I don't know anybody that would think, if I die, I want my spouse to be sad and miserable.
Right.
Yeah. Nobody,
die a lonely
nobody
death.
wants that. Right. Yeah. It's like, think of me forever and just,
curl in a ball and cry forever.
And that's something I talk about with clients, is like, this widower I'm dating, he's struggling with how to honor his late wife. It's like, no, the best way to honor his late wife is to figure out what he wants in chapter 2 and have a happy life. That's the best way to honor the deceased.
Yeah.
I think that is the perfect ender. Abel, literally, I'm going to read all 7 of your books. We're going to have you back on. I have a writer crush on you. I think that you are phenomenal. I think it's really hard to find people who can speak the voice honestly and truthfully. And it is so freaking scary to do what you have done. I've only read 1 of your books. I apologize. You booked really quickly, and I was like, there's no way in hell I can read all 7 of these books, but I will.
Abel, is this your primary job?
No,
is this
what secondary.
You do? Yeah.
Or is this your second? Yeah.
Oh, it's your primary job? I thought you had another job, but maybe that was in your younger years.
Yeah, that was in my younger years when I didn't come into this thinking, honestly, I was going to be a relationship coach. It just kind of, it's filled a need, it just kind of grew and grew and grew. So it's not, it wasn't like, I'm going to be a relationship coach. No, it was just, the demand got to the point where it's like, oh, I can do this. So
yeah, it's amazing. Honestly, isn't it cool to think about you are doing for others what maybe would have been cool that you and Krista could have the opportunity. Like I always think like if Carl and we luckily did go to therapy at the end, but had we have started in certain therapy, I think we would have had a much richer marriage. And I know David feels the same about him and Betsy.
The most understated thing for my marriage that you could ever say.
So it's really cool that you have the opportunity to do this for others as well as for yourself and for Julie. So, I appreciate you. I'm going to hit the end of record. Thank you so much. Okay. So everyone check the show notes. Again, we have got lots of suicide prevention, loss, resources. Abel, obviously, you're going to have to get in line. David and I are going to have to go see him as a relationship coach because as we love to have on the show, he is. We like experiential experts. We like experts that have actually walked the walk, because I think it's really hard in grief to go to see therapists. Are really amazing if they're grief therapists, but I think often you really need a circle of people who've been through what you've been through to understand. And so how amazing it is that you are a resource for people out there. So we'll put all your information so people can find you and read his books, get a tissue box, but read his books. It's amazing.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.